Omnichannel marketing does mean quite a few things to a lot of people, depending on how well versed they are in a holistic go-to-market strategy, as well, as potentially a singular to multiple tech stacks or partners that you're bringing together, both to deliver the creative into the marketplace, but then also to track and attribute on the back end. If we're looking at like a 360 campaign that may be involving multiple publishers, one way to approach an omnichannel campaign is to say, we want this one or cohesive set of messages to appear in multiple touch points. And by that, we mean print. It could be out of home, so billboard, either digital or print. It could be an audio, so podcast streaming, commercials, or with digital display, right? And then the different forms of digital display, whether it's banners or native advertising. And so depending on if you're working with a partner that can stitch all that together, either because they have a holistic approach to serving 360 campaigns, and you have a person or an agency that's bringing all of those channels together, or because you're working with a tech partner in pretty much exclusively the digital space, that will allow you to accomplish many of those goals within the digital realm. And so with that, most marketers, when they're solving for not only market penetration and messaging saturation, are hoping to deliver on as many platforms as are available to them, and also to keep that high touch, that recency frequency going with an omni-channel campaign. But also many marketers, especially in cannabis, are solving for bandwidth constraints. And so trying to look at how they can get their message out in as many ways to their audience and to their target markets as they possibly can. There's a few variables. And first I'll start with the strategy and look at the marketing mix, and never skip over the word mix, because that is what we're testing for. That's what we're looking to see through our AB, CD, EFG tests with marketing, to look to see what resonates, what's effective, what has impacts, what drives performance, all of these good KPIs that we're looking to establish, key performance indicators. First, let's start with the channels that are available to us. And so within marketing, we have our owned channels. So our owned channels are anything that is branded by us, whether it's our website, our email, our text messaging, and then to some extent into social media, including our social handles and what have you. Then we also have our earned media, which is PR, and to some extent influencer marketing, depending on how this is categorized within the organization. And then lastly, paid media and marketing. And so looking at advertising. And so between owned, earned, and paid, looking at which of the channels and tactics we want to activate on in order to accomplish our goals. And so within that, once we determine, one, what's available to us that meets the strategy. Two, what's our budget? And then three, what is the likelihood that by activating within that marketing mix that we're going to achieve what will then be set up as our key performance indicators. And so in order to answer the question, what's going to be most effective, we need to know what we're trying to ask people to do. And so with that call to action, depending on if we want to drive foot traffic to a retail dispensary for a doorbuster sale, then if we have a robust text messaging channel set up, that is the most effective way to drive our customers into the stores through text messaging to this day. If we want more of a long form and have multiple calls to action, email is still the most effective way to stay connected with cannabis consumers today. So not to sleep on email as being foundational to our calls to actions and to our connectivity with our consumers. But then in thinking about some of the other tactics, such as starting to drive brand awareness or engagement, that's when you start to really dial into to PR efforts, to influencer through endorsement, through paid media, because what you want to do is go reach people that don't know that they don't know you yet. And so how do we activate in networks that are already trusted, whether that's press or through an influencers community and collective, or through advertising. And the reason why we dial up advertising is really to be able to be extremely focused in our targeting and our reach, as well as have a recency and frequency to stay top of mind. Because what we're really doing with all of these marketing touch points is building and fostering and jogging memory. So that is so important. It's so important to while we may have a centralized message or a message that we are looking to repeat, it is so essential that we do so within the community guidelines, vibe, the graphic and creative specifications for each platform. It is amazing to me, that people may, try to repurpose some graphics on social media, but they would never even consider doing that on a billboard, right? But it's still your brand and it still has the same effect. And so it's important to make sure that you show up as glorious as you possibly can be. And so you're absolutely right to not skip that step of making sure that the creative, the messaging, the way in which you're engaging with the community makes good sense. And that includes everything from, make sure on Instagram it's link in bio, not a link dropped into an unlinkable space. It looks like you're cutting corners. And so if we're taking the time and the effort to go and reach out and connect, it's worth making sure we're polished in each environment. It's so valuable to have not only your personas in mind from a strategic point of view, but then also have an active database that you can segment and target not only relevant, but also at times automated communications to those audience segments. And so going back to the personas, it's so important as a team, even if we put our personas on the less of like a novel character sketch end of the spectrum to the this is a real person that we have in mind that we're going after. And so I don't have a hard and fast rule for how do we develop our personas. But I do think that they are important because it keeps the leadership team and the decision-making team focused on who are our true audiences. So for example, I was working with a cannabis tech company, and the first iteration of their product could only serve single dispensary owners. And so they have one activation. They weren't yet ready to have multiple sites be part of their cannabis tech platform. And so in that case, it was really, really important for us as we developed our personas to think about owners that had one dispensary. And there is a variety within that particular market that we could create, the upwards of 4 personas. I wouldn't recommend going over more. 2 core buyer personas and then 2 major influencers within those personas. And then obviously there's always the persona of press to keep in the mix. But with that, looking at the personas so that we stay focused on, what is our service or what is our product and how are we meeting the needs right now. Personas can change and we can grow into developing more personas when our capabilities change, but it's really a good practice to keep people focused and continually map back to the reason why we are activating on these channels or these tactics is because this is the persona. We're not ready for the other ones yet, right? Or even if we activate it in this way, we're going to attract personas that we can't serve yet. And so trying to stay focused there. The second part of this is as we develop our CRM or our database, which I think depending on how you need to deploy that database, I think HubSpot and Alpine IQ are 2 fantastic CRMs in the space that are doing incredible work to help us have not only segmentable data, but also actionable data. And so it is crucial. This is the absolute life, blood, and force of your marketing programs are lists that you can understand who these customers and people and community members are and what they're interested in. either hearing from you because they've enthusiastically opted in, or because you can see, past engagement with your brand or your messagings and your products, and tailor relevant messaging to them. With data, the fantastic thing about referencing data is that it keeps us honest, right? So all of us as marketers or as creators or as brand builders, we have an idea of who we think is going to buy our product. And then if data will tell us who actually buys, or data will tell us who actually engages. And it is also interesting too to think about as we go to market with different types of content, to use data to say, did we actually reach who we thought we were intending to reach with this? And not only is it a good, validation or, keep us honest, there's also an incredible source of saying, we thought that a certain age demo was going to tune in and engage with this. And what we realized actually is that our 65 plus crowd is so excited to learn about this technique. And so, you know what, next time around, let's have a very specific conversation, speaking to our elders and addressing our elders so that they see themselves reflected in our brand too. So using data to not only validate, but then also to expand who we think that we're, engaging with, and do so in a more inclusive and delightful way. I would really, recommend do not select all, copy paste, whether you're talking about a PowerPoint presentation or a email or a tweet. So we know this, right? We've talked about it a little bit to make sure that for each, incredibly precious moment that you have to attract somebody's attention, show how much you value it by being your absolute best polished self. The second thing I would say specifically with cannabis, and this is something that is a little bit more debated, but I take the track for me personally as a cannabis marketer that I don't do workarounds per se. If it has been categorically and explicitly stated that this company or publisher or community does not engage with cannabis, I tend to not push that by trying to go around it in some way. I continue to advocate and make the business case with these publishers and platforms or organizations as to address the concerns of why don't you want to work with the cannabis sector, and then endeavor to be a resource and a help and a guide for helping them be comfortable with it. But I personally do not work with companies that have actively said that they don't want to market cannabis for whatever reasons. Attribution and measurement is one of the most complex parts of marketing. And it's important, but I also don't think it's the end all be all of a marketing endeavor. And so some of the really important KPIs that I look at, one is for each individual instance of our call to action, really, did they do what we asked them to do? Like most simply. And if we asked them to enthusiastically opt into our newsletter, did they do it? If we asked them to go to a web page, did they spend more than 1 minute, ideally 2 minutes, depending on how long the content is, on that page? If we asked them to share it, did they do it? If we asked them to come to the webinar or come to the event, and one, they RSVP'd, then two, did they show up, right? And really tracking through, and I've just listed a few, click-through rate, dwell time, looking for activations with people's first-party data, looking for activations in real life, and then time spent, and then also then thinking about engagement and sharing out, is really looking at those metrics as indicators that people were interested, that it resonated, and then that they felt so compelled that they shared it. Obviously, if there's a product to sell or a ticket to be sold, we'll be measuring it in terms of revenue. But there's also, I think it's very, very important for marketing to take a macro look at their programs as well. So, for example, click through attribution can be very difficult. But what you may be able to see is that there's an overall lift on your website or an overall lift on your direct to consumer sales. And so I think it's also important to take a look at, are there, since we've turned on this campaign, have we seen a steady, increase? And while we can't tie it one-to-one all the time, because let's face it, your memory gets jogged. What do? You go to Google, you type it into the search bar, you get, the landing page, or you get the like street address for where you're going, and you go there. And that quite honestly is a broken attribution between someone seeing something or having their memory be jogged and them going to the actual source to purchase. And so people, since the beginning of advertising, people have been trying to figure out, and marketing have been trying to figure out this attribution through line. But until then, one of the most, important things we can do is look at the micro as far as we can, but then also the macro picture of, do we see overall lift? Do we see overall new? Or do we see overall return of our communities?
Are there any emerging trends or technologies that you see shaping the future of this type of marketing? And if so, how significant do you think their impact will be?
I do love to see more and more publishers come online for both paid advertising, as what for cannabis in particular. There's two things you can do at scale. You can have a press hit that soars, and the great thing about that is that you've resonated and connected with a engaged and a trusted source. But the hard part with press is that it's episodic, and so it's up and down. The other thing that you can do at that's transactional at scale is advertising. And so that allows you to keep a steady flow of relevant traffic going to your properties. And so seeing more and more advertising come online to balance out the good efforts of the episodic, fantastic PR that's going on in the space, such incredible content that's being made and created within the cannabis space that's so creative, to be able to drive consistent traffic through paid advertising is, I think, a great addition to the mix. And I'm excited to see, obviously, Twitter, we've seen this recently, but also for CBD brands, Pinterest has recently come online to offer both paid and organic positions and inventory to CBD brands. And so I think that the signs are definitely pointing towards publishers serving their audiences and customers that have already said, we're ready for this. More and more polls are showing that people are open to the sector, and so people are at the helms of these decisions, are getting more and more comfortable with serving content. And so much of it, whether it's an internal resource that you're building, and team member that you're building up or looking to hire for, or that it's a marketing program or campaign that you're looking to outsource, the most helpful, necessary thing that we need to align on is scope of work, and where are people, who's leading and who's executing, right? And so make sure you've got your people aligned, and then everyone's on the same page of what are the expectations from not only the strategy and the development, but then also the execution. So that's that's a very, broad picture of, learning to engage. But then the second thing is not only, are the people aligned and the scope aligned, but then also the budget's aligned. And so everyone's everyone's fully charging ahead, understanding, what role they're playing and for how long they're playing it and what's expected of them. And that's an internal or external recommendation. One program that I didn't speak to too much, but specifically with cannabis and also the way that supply chains are oriented, is I do think LinkedIn is probably one of the most underutilized platforms within the cannabis sector, especially when we're looking at how many operators do need to connect with a business to business audience for their sales. And so thinking about how do we engage with retailers, how do we professionally engage with the decision makers for companies, with investors who have a portfolio of investments in companies that they are looking to make sure have the best resources. And so I do believe that LinkedIn is very permissive when it comes to cannabis and is a great resource for people to invest in, for their content, for their networking, and then also for their new kind of prospecting or awareness tactics.